Most people drive past the hills and valleys of southern Ohio without a second thought. The cornfields, the quiet, the Amish carts, the winding two-lane highways. It all whispers normalcy, but beneath that quiet earth lies a silence that isn't peace. It's secrecy. Buried in that land are truths so raw, so vast in implication, that entire chapters of our known history would collapse if they were ever fully revealed. In Adams County, where the landscape ripples like the back of some enormous creature, one of the greatest enigmas of North America lies coiled into the land. Serpent Mound. Not just a hill, not just dirt, but an effigy, a symbolic creature stretching over 300 feet, coiled and watching. But here's the thing they don't want you to think about. The serpent isn't just an art piece. It's aligned precisely to celestial events. Its head points to the summer solstice sunset. Its curves trace the moon's oscillations with mathematical perfection. And it sits, not coincidentally, on top of a 300-million-year-old meteor impact crater. Why would a prehistoric civilization, one supposedly without writing, metal, or wheels, design a sacred monument that doubles as a cosmic observatory, then build it directly over an ancient cosmic impact site? Coincidence? Or was this intentional, ritualistic? Was it built by those who survived something, or those who foresaw something coming? Historians will tell you it was built around 1000 AD by the Fort Ancient culture, maybe, but what they won't say is that earlier cultures, the Adena and Hopewell, were already shaping this land for centuries, raising sacred geometries no modern archaeologist can fully explain. Layer upon layer of spiritual engineering, celestial knowledge, and geomantic mastery buried under millennia of polite denial. Because what does it say about the official narrative if cultures considered primitive? V had a deeper understanding of the moon's 18.6-year standstill than most of us today. Now here's where it goes deeper, where it gets dangerous. The oval at the serpent's head is not decorative. Some say it represents an egg, creation, fertility. Others say the sun, but what if it's neither? What if it's a symbol of something coming back, something the ancients tracked, feared, and tried to bind with ritual geometry? Across the globe, serpent symbols appear in the oldest traditions, as guardians, deceivers, wisdom bearers, or destroyers. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl. In the Bible, Eden's whispering snake. In Hinduism, the Nagas. In Norse myth, Jormungandr, the world serpent that encircles the earth and marks the end of time. It's no coincidence that serpents are the universal harbingers of forbidden knowledge. And in Ohio, someone built a monument to one. But why there? Why Ohio? Why does this heartland, far from Egypt, Sumer, or the Andes, contain so many unexplained alignments, sacred geometries, and structures impossible to build without some kind of higher blueprint? What if this land wasn't peripheral to ancient history, but central to it? And here's the real question. What if ancient Ohio wasn't just a ceremonial site, but a control system? Not in the modern surveillance tech sense, but in the oldest sense, where geometry manipulates consciousness, where mounds aren't decorations but antennas, energy batteries, ritual sites designed not to mark space, but to shape it. That's where we begin. But you're not just hearing a story, you're entering a contract. Because from here on out, this isn't about ancient dirt and bones. It's about control. It's about you and the quiet war to blind you from what was once common knowledge among those who shaped the stars into stone. Every mystery we uncover from here, every mound, every buried code, is not a lie. See, it's a mirror, and once you see your reflection in it, there's no unseeing it. They call it the Hopewell culture, as if giving it a name makes it manageable, as if naming something tames it. But what they don't tell you is that the Hopewell weren't just builders. They were engineers of conscious space, alchemists of land and sky. Their ceremonial centers, Newark, Mound City, Seep Earthworks, they weren't settlements, they were machines, ritual technologies. Each circle, square, and octagon wasn't just a shape. It was a trigger, a ritual geometry that once synchronized the human body, the lunar cycle, and the very breath of the planet. What does it mean when an octagonal structure built 2,000 years ago aligns with the moon's 18.6-year lunar standstill, down to the degree? That's not guesswork. That's knowledge. timeless knowledge. And you were told it was accidental, but it wasn't. The ancients knew what NASA confirmed only recently, that the moon wobbles, that it follows a complex dance most don't notice. But the Hopewell noticed, and they built for it. They tracked it, measured it, then shaped the earth beneath their feet to mirror the heavens. You think you're standing on ground, but you're standing on a calendar, a clock, a memory you were trained to forget. And that's just the beginning, because what they don't want you to ask is this: what were they timing? Why build ceremonial centers that map out a lunar cycle nearly 2 decades long, unless something returns on that cycle, something they needed to watch or invoke? You were taught to laugh at the idea that ancient cultures had advanced knowledge, that they couldn't possibly understand astronomy, magnetism, or dimensional resonance. But let me ask you something. Why do nearly every one of these Hopewell sites sit on fault lines, magnetic anomalies, or water table intersections? Because they knew the power grid of the Earth. They knew how to amplify it, and more dangerously, to manipulate consciousness through it. This wasn't just burial. This wasn't just ceremony. It was technology. The Hopewell didn't need metal. They didn't need satellites. They had geometry, silence, intention, stone, and rhythm. And with that, they created something modern man can't replicate, a sacred system embedded into land and time. Do you understand what that means? They weren't primitive. We are. We, with our blue-lit distractions and algorithmic sedation, are the ones cut off from real power. Because somewhere along the line, someone made sure to break the chain, to cut the signal, to make sure that you would never know that you come from builders of portals, not peasants, from map makers of reality, not wanderers. And the Hopewell, they left behind warnings. Massive mounds shaped like cosmic symbols, burial chambers lined with materials from thousands of miles away, obsidian from the Rockies, shells from the Gulf, copper from the Great Lakes. These weren't just trade goods, they were frequencies, each one chosen to harmonize with something they were tracking, something not of this earth. And maybe that's the darkest truth of all. The Hopewell knew we weren't alone, that there was something else, something ancient, something watching, something coming back. That's why the mounds align. That's why the dead were buried with precision. That's why rituals followed celestial scripts. Not to honor the past, but to influence the future. And here's the part that should shake you. When these sites fell silent, when the cultures who built them vanished, the alignments remained, still pointing, still counting, still waiting. Waiting for you to wake up. Let me tell you about the Newark earthworks, the largest geometric earthwork complex on Earth. Not in Egypt, not in China, not in Peru, in Ohio. 4 square miles. Precision-cut circles, octagons, parallel walls, aligned not to vanity, but to the celestial mechanics of the moon. The octagon earthwork tracks an 18.6-year lunar cycle with an accuracy modern surveyors still marvel at. It's not a guess. It's a cosmic blueprint etched into soil. But here's where it gets darker. This site isn't just a clock, it's a signal chamber. The octagon was once connected to the Great Circle by a long, processional pathway, a corridor for rites. Processions didn't just walk this path, they were changed by it. Its proportions? Nearly identical to resonant frequency calculations in acoustic chambers. Its construction involves soil layered in a way that filters electromagnetic fields. Ask yourself this: why would an ancient civilization go through the impossible task of constructing massive earth structures by hand, without metal, without wheels, unless they were tuning into something more than just time? Because they were. They were communing. With what? That's the part they've scrubbed from the textbooks. That's the part that shows up in oral tradition, but gets laughed off by modern academia. The stories say these were sites where the veil was thin, where sky beings walked among men, where messages were received, not taught, where portals opened. And look at where these structures point, to the major lunar standstill, the point where the moon appears to stop and hover at its extreme northern or southern rise. A moment that only happens once every 18.6 years.
Why mark that event? Why build an enormous, mathematically precise octagon that locks into that moment with eerie perfection? Unless it mattered. Unless it was the moment when the door opened. Let me put this plainly. They
say weren't ceremonial centers. They were reactivation sites, and were dangerously close to the next lunar standstill. The next moment when everything these ancient systems were built to track lines up again. And what happens then? You were never supposed to ask that, because the deeper truth is this. Civilizations don't vanish without a trace. They vanish with intention. They vanish when the portal is sealed, the technology is buried, and the knowledge is suppressed, and you, the descendant of those who once knew, are programmed to forget. That's what's been done to you. Your memory has been colonized. Your awareness has been edited. You've been taught to kneel at the altar of progress while the real power was buried in your own soil, and now they build golf courses over it. Yes, the Octagon earthworks are now surrounded by country clubs. You think that's an accident? That is ritual desecration disguised as zoning, because nothing seals a sacred site like mockery. Nothing erases a memory faster than ridicule. But the land remembers, the stones remember, the geometry still works. It's not gone, it's dormant, waiting, and now you've seen the blueprint. So what are you going to do with it? You've never heard of the alligator mound. That's the point. It's tucked into a hill near Granville, Ohio, out of sight, out of mind, and yet it is one of the only known effigy mounds in the state. Shaped like a creature with a long tail, 4 limbs, and an open, snarling jaw. It's been called an alligator, but the tribes who still carry the oral traditions say something different. They say it's a spirit guardian, a being from beneath, a watcher of gates. You think this is myth? Then ask yourself why this mound, like the serpent, contains no bones, no artifacts, no trade goods, no burials. It is not a tomb. It is a message. And its shape? It doesn't match any alligator known to nature. It's closer to the underwater panther, a creature feared and worshipped across Native American mythos. A hybrid entity, feline, serpentine, elemental, said to guard portals between this world and the underworld. Why would an entire culture build a 250-foot mound to represent such a creature? Unless they believed it was real. More importantly, unless they'd seen it. The Fort Ancient people, the culture linked to this structure, inherited sacred sites from their predecessors. They weren't inventing the myths, they were preserving fragments, guarding keys. But over generations, the meanings faded. The words changed, until only the symbol remained, burned into the land. And still, it calls. The Alligator Mound sits on a high ridge overlooking the Raccoon Creek Valley. That's not scenic coincidence. That's ritual elevation. You build where energy converges, where ley lines cross, where the spirits can see you, and where you can see them. That's how it worked. Geometry wasn't for beauty, it was a weapon, a tool of alignment, a tuning fork between worlds. When you shape the land correctly, the veil thins. But today, we bulldoze that geometry. We flatten the sacred. We pave over gateways. And when that happens, something else wakes up. Something that remembers what we've forgotten. The mound's creators were warning us. They knew that what sleeps below is not dead. It's waiting. And every 18.6 years, every cycle of moonrise and fall, the seal weakens. The pressure changes. The skin between worlds stretches thin. What happens when the memory locked in that mound is triggered again? What happens when the land starts remembering you? Because that's the real secret. You're not separate from the symbols. You are the symbol. The Alligator Mound isn't just a warning. It's a mirror. You were meant to guard something too, to remember something terrible, something beautiful, something true. But you were rewritten, your bloodline recoded, your sight dimmed. You were turned into a consumer, a spectator, a man staring at screens while the ground beneath your home pulses with the last echo of a forgotten age of power. But that age isn't gone, it's underground, and it's starting to breathe again. Drive your car through Marietta, Ohio, and you'll pass playgrounds, sidewalks, street lamps, but beneath them is a forgotten necropolis. The Marietta Earthworks, a ceremonial complex once called the Athens of the West. But this was no mere village, no tribe of wandering primitives. This was a spiritual city, engineered with more precision than most modern architecture, designed to channel death into transformation. You think pyramids only exist in Egypt? Then you've never seen Quadranao Mound, a platform mound that once held temples, a gathering place for rituals that manipulated more than just memory. They manipulated transition from life to death, from material to astral, from man to something else. Here's what they won't print in textbooks. The mound was constructed at the confluence of the Muskingum and Ohio rivers, a liminal zone, a place where two bodies of water merge, where native cosmology says two worlds bleed together. That's not coincidence, that's design. These weren't just burial sites, these were portals, the kind of portals that don't just open by digging or dreaming. They open with geometry, sacrifice, sound, and intention. And this is where it gets worse. Because during the 19th century, America built over it. Streets, banks, courthouses, the foundations of Marietta literally rest upon the ruins of a spirit gate. You were never supposed to find that out. You were never supposed to realize that your city is haunted by the infrastructure of an older order, an order that worked in symbols, in silence, and in sacrifice. Let's talk about Conus Mound. It still stands, 30 feet high, in Mound Cemetery. But even that is a distortion, because around it are the tombstones of Revolutionary War soldiers. Let that sink in. They buried America's founding fathers inside a sacred native necropolis. You think that's reverence? It's ritual conquest. It's symbolic erasure. It's how empires hijack energy, not by destroying what came before, but by burying their dead on top of yours. And now, that desecration echoes. The air around Marietta hums with forgotten vibrations. The ground remembers. You might not feel it at first, but walk through the cemetery at dawn, and you'll understand. You are walking on bones, on codes, on interrupted transmission. The original builders of Marietta's earthworks didn't vanish. They were buried alive in memory, sealed beneath brick and concrete. But like all systems powered by the sacred, they wait for someone who remembers the alignment, for someone who hears the call beneath the hum of traffic. They wait for someone like you. So here's the question that should haunt you tonight. If you stood atop Conus Mound, at the right hour, at the right phase of the moon, would you still feel the current? Because those gates may be buried, but the key, it's been hidden in your own blood this whole time. Buried in the southern Ohio hills, invisible to most, stands a riddle in dirt and geometry. A structure so precise, so vast in scope, that it's barely believable until you stand before it. This is the Seep Earthworks, and what lies here isn't just a ceremonial site. It is a mirror of cosmic order, built by a civilization you were told was primitive. But primitive men don't build sacred cities from pure math. Seep Mound alone stretches over 240 feet, once 30 feet high, a burial structure the size of a small fortress. But what it contained is more powerful than any monument. Inside, cremation chambers, mortuary temples, bodies placed with precision, artifacts from across the continent, obsidian from Yellowstone, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf. How did they get here? Why bring thousands of miles of material into the Valley of the Dead? Because Seep wasn't a village, it was a ritual engine. Every burial, every carving, every structure fed a cycle, a feedback loop between the living, the dead, and the unseen. You weren't meant to bury and forget. You were meant to return, transformed. Now look at the layout. Seep Earthworks formed a circle connected to a square, connected again by parallel walls. This isn't arbitrary. This is sacred architecture. The circle is the infinite. The square is the material. The connection? That's you. The human body, the soul in transit, the geometry of death becoming memory. And memory, properly encoded, doesn't fade. It transmits. It infects. It awakens. That's what this site does. It's a transmission device, one that still whispers when the stars return to the alignment the Hopewell tracked with nothing but sky and silence. Ask yourself, why would a people who had no wheels, no metal, no writing, know how to align a 200-foot circle with the lunar nodes, because they weren't working from ignorance. They were working from something we lost. And here's where it gets sickening. The site was excavated, looted, torn apart, studied, then abandoned, just like every other place that threatened to reveal the lie. Because these sites don't just prove cultural sophistication, they shatter the narrative of linear progress. They expose the lie that knowledge comes only through science and that those before us were less than human. They weren't. They were closer to source. They shaped soil like scripture. They built temples from alignment, not brick. They encoded resonance into geometry, and they lived lives with spiritual gravity. Now look at us, lost in cities that hum with low frequencies and false light. We worship data, but we forget truth. We track time with plastic, but forget that the moon was always enough. You feel it, don't you? This aching in your chest, this pull in your gut. It's the part of you that remembers the circle, that knows you were meant to connect, not consume, to align, not to obey. This is what SEEP offers you, not just a history, a return. But beware, the deeper you go, the more the lies fall away. And when they're gone, what's left? Only you, and the truth, and the responsibility that comes with knowing it. In the quiet countryside of Licking County stands the Newark Earthworks. But these aren't just mounds. They are a monumental machine, a landscape-scale instrument, tuned to the moon. Let me say that again, because you've been trained to forget the moon. The Hopewell didn't build these structures for art. They didn't build them for burial. They built them to track the lunar standstill, a cycle so complex that it takes 18.6 years to complete. Let that sink in. Before telescopes, before computers, they mapped the heavens onto the earth with dirt, wood, and firelight. At the heart of it all is the Octagon Earthworks, nearly 50 acres wide, laid out with more precision than the Great Pyramid. The angles? Exact. The alignments? Lunar locked. They weren't guessing. They weren't stumbling through the dark. They were remembering something we have since abandoned. And what is the moon, really? It's not just a rock in space. To the ancients, the moon was a gatekeeper, a symbol of the divine feminine, of cycles, of rebirth and madness, of timing, of sacrifice. The Hopewell encoded this into every corner of Newark's sacred geometry. The Great Circle, 1,200 feet in diameter, holds an interior ditch and platform mound, a place not just for ritual, but for immersion. When you stood inside it during ritual, during celestial alignment, you weren't watching the sky. You were inside the sky, inside the pattern. This wasn't astronomy. This was initiation. You entered the earthwork, and the earthwork entered you. But today, you won't hear that, because much of the Octagon Earthworks now sits inside a country club. Yes, a sacred lunar observatory, converted into a golf course. The grass rolled over the voices of the dead, the ancestors now silenced beneath sand traps and artificial landscaping. You think that's progress? That's desecration. But there's a deeper anger here, because in desecrating these sites, we don't just insult memory, we sever the connection. You see, the ancients didn't need to record knowledge the way we do. They didn't write books. They encoded information into form, into land, shape, and rhythm. When you walk through the Octagon, you're walking through a sentence carved in geometry, a phrase in a forgotten language, one that still whispers to those who listen, but only if you're listening. That's why they buried this. Because if modern men stood inside the sacred ratios, if they felt the pattern awaken something inside, they might begin to question everything they've been told. They might remember that the mind isn't the only tool of knowing, that the body remembers, that spirit speaks, that truth is physical. And if you begin to feel that truth, if you stand inside the Octagon, under the right moon, and remember, you become dangerous. Because a man who remembers his place in the pattern, a man who walks in the rhythm of the stars, a man who knows he is the axis between the seen and unseen, that man cannot be controlled. And that's why they paved it, covered it, mocked it. Because if even one of you remembers, the pattern restarts and the gates open. Let me take you now to Granville, Ohio, a small town, a peaceful town, A place you'd never expect to find a guardian of the underworld sleeping beneath the soil. But you will. Here lies the alligator effigy mound, though that name is a lie. It's not an alligator. It never was. That's just the label the colonizers gave it, when they couldn't understand what they were looking at, when they needed to simplify the sacred into the absurd. What it truly is a spirit beast. 4 limbs, a coiled tail, an open mouth, positioned atop a sacred ridge, watching, waiting. You've seen this shape before, not in nature, in dream, in myth, in symbols older than language. It's the underwater panther, the horned serpent, the guardian of the threshold between the seen and the unseen. The ancients knew this place, this exact ridge, was a crossing point, a convergence of sky, land, and the subterranean realm. And they didn't just build here. They invoked something here. They shaped 250 feet of earth, not to bury, but to summon, to embody, to make present the thing that moves between worlds. You think this is myth? Then answer this. Why are there no remains in the mound, no artifacts, no bodies? Because this wasn't a tomb. It was a conduit. They brought offerings, not of bones, but of breath, of song, of fear. They came here when the sky opened and the waters boiled, when the veil grew thin. They came to speak with the guardian, and maybe to become it. Because that's the secret they've buried under centuries of textbooks. The ancients didn't worship idols. They transformed into them. Through dance, through ritual, through geometry and sacrifice, they became extensions of the entity they invoked. That's what this effigy is, a mirror, a trigger, a transformation chamber. And here's where it turns dangerous. Because every time someone walks past it and is not remember, the guardian sleeps a little deeper. And every time a man remembers, the mound stirs. Ask the locals. There are stories of strange sounds in the wind, of animals refusing to go near the site, of people standing at its open mouth and hearing their own name whispered back. Why do you think it's still intact? Why do you think it hasn't been bulldozed or converted like the others? Because even the system is afraid of what lies here. They don't touch the alligator mound. They circle it. They observe it. But they do not disturb it. Because deep down, they know this isn't history. It's a promise that if even one man remembers the ritual, if even one voice calls out in the old tongue, if even one heartbeat matches the rhythm of the tale, then the guardian will rise again. And this time, it will not speak to priests. It will not speak to empires. It will speak to you. Because it's not guarding the past. It's guarding your future. And the only question that remains is this. When you stand before it, will you walk away? Or will you open your mouth and roar back? Now, we descend to a place soaked in duality, where one world ends and another begins. Welcome to the Marietta Earthworks. Buried at the confluence of the Muskingum and Ohio rivers, it was once a portal city. A place not of commerce, but ceremony. Not of law, but liminality. A forgotten metropolis of mounds, walls, and geometry, so precise it defies everything you've been told about the people who built it. But most of it is gone. Paved, crushed, swallowed by the advance of civilization. Yet what remains is a warning. Let me explain. When the first white settlers stumbled upon Marietta's ancient layout, they didn't just see dirt. They saw dominion. They incorporated the mounds into their city planning, not out of reverence, but dominance. They built roads around them, cemeteries on top of them. They mapped conquest onto sacred space, and in doing so, they fractured something. You see, the Marietta earthworks weren't passive. They were alive. The mounds weren't just burial sites. They were frequency anchors. Capitolium Mound? That wasn't just a platform. It was a signal tower, elevated to capture, store, and redirect spiritual resonance. A node in a grid of power. Conus Mound? That's a gateway. It still stands in what they now call Mound Cemetery, where the bones of native priests now rest beneath the tombstones of Revolutionary War soldiers. One burial ground layered over another, a palimpsest of power, a quiet war of spirits still waging. This isn't coincidence. This is ritual conquest. Because in the old world, you didn't just conquer a people by killing them. You conquered them by burying your dead over theirs. You overlaid your memory atop theirs, until theirs vanished. But memory doesn't die easy, especially when it's encoded in stone, especially when it's anchored to rivers, which, to the ancients, weren't just water, but veins of the earth, channels of movement, of transition, of souls in passage. So what do we really have here? We have a river temple, built where two realms meet, the Ohio and Muskingum. The ancients believed such places were portals. Where the waters joined, the veil thinned, and now, the portal sits clogged with asphalt and bureaucracy, but the frequency remains. Some men report feeling dizzy there, others weep, unexplainably. Some report vivid dreams, of fires, drums, and a voice calling their name in a language they don't understand, yet ache to remember. Because the mounds never stopped speaking, you just stopped listening. And those who tried to erase it, to colonize the current, they didn't win. They merely delayed what's coming. Because energy doesn't disappear, it builds. And the forgotten grids of Ohio, they're waking. Every time you walk their lines, every time you feel that pulse beneath your feet, every time you remember, even for a second, that the land was once sacred geometry, you reignite the system. You bring the current back online. So ask yourself, what if these sites weren't meant to be visited? What if they were meant to be reactivated? What if every mound is a key, every alignment is a code, and you, the man who dares to listen, are the final piece? And if you are, then the Marietta Earthworks is no longer a mystery. It's a summoning.
You're ready. Now we go to what they call the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks, a phrase too sterile to contain what's really there. These are not mounds. These are not circles. These are not archaeological relics. They are engines, not of war, not of trade, but of awakening. Scattered across southern Ohio, these massive geometric formations stretch over 150 kilometers. Circles, squares, octagons, perfectly aligned with celestial events and encoded with symbols only the initiated can feel. Let me be clear. You are not looking at graves. You are looking at neural nodes of an Earth-based consciousness grid, built by those who remembered the unity between sky, body, spirit, and land. Sites like Mound City, Seep Earthworks, and the Newark Complex weren't just spiritual spaces, they were ritual laboratories. Each mound, each wall, each line of sight, carefully calculated to charge the human system with cosmic rhythm. You walk through one of these formations, and your breath changes. Your heartbeat syncs with angles. You don't know why, but your body does. Because it's not architecture, it's recalibration. And here's what breaks the mind of any historian still trapped in the lie. The Hopewell people, using only stone, bone, and fire, engineered cosmic observatories capable of tracking 18.6-year lunar cycles even modern science barely noticed until the 20th century. Explain that. Explain how so-called primitive people could lay down Earth with such mathematical precision that modern GPS tools still can't find fault in the alignments. You can't. Unless you admit the truth, they weren't guessing. They weren't stumbling through darkness. They were remembering a science that predates your civilization, and they weren't doing it alone. Because here's where it deepens. Artifacts recovered from these sites, obsidian from the Rockies, mica from the Carolinas,
Marine shells from the Gulf reveal a trade network spanning thousands of miles. But more importantly, they reveal a ritual network, a spiritual alliance between cultures long thought isolated. This wasn't a scattered tribe. This was a spiritual confederacy, a guild of skywalkers, earthmakers, and dream seers. And they were building more than earthworks. They were building a calendar of consciousness, one that marks not just the movement of stars, but the timing of human transformation. Every angle, every diameter, every wall is a code for when and how a man awakens, a roadmap from sleep to sovereignty. But here's what will shake you. They didn't build these for their own time. They built them for ours, because they knew what was coming. They saw the forgetting. They saw the empire of steel and screen, the mind control systems, the algorithmic slavery. They saw you, the modern man, cut off from source, addicted to silence,
deaf to the call of the earth, and they built reminders, in dirt, in stone, in sacred shape. They buried truth where only the awakened would walk, and now you're walking. You, right now. Hearing these words, feeling something shift in your chest, a memory not from this life, but from something older, something deeper. It's not nostalgia, it's reactivation. So let me ask you a question. If these were just mounds, why are they aligned with the solstice? Why are they mirrored in star maps? Why do men dream strange things after walking their perimeters? Why are governments fighting over land rights to them still? Because somewhere, deep in the machinery of power, they know. This grid, this ancient Ohio network, is waking up. And when enough men remember the rhythm, when enough feet walk the angles with reverence, when enough voices speak the old names, then the ceremonial network will light up again, not with fire, not with conquest, but with a collective remembering that rips the veil off history and turns the obedient into the initiated, because these aren't ruins, they're temples waiting for kings to return.